Thank you for inviting us to this important meeting, and thank African Investor for playing that role of sound and effective vehicle in promoting infrastructure development in the continent. I will go very quickly through 5 points. The first one will be about the originality of PEDA. What has changed with PEDA? Between 1960, the 60s to the 2000s, we used to think about infrastructure development on the basis of ad hoc projects defined without a sound prioritization. What is changing with PEDA is that we look at infrastructure development in a structural way. That means that we target within PEDA regional projects and programs. Why regional projects and programs? Because when it comes to infrastructure, there are no optimal national solutions. The optimal solutions to the infrastructure challenges in the continent are at the regional level. And I think this is extremely important to understand this. Whether you talk about transport, energy, or you name it, the optimal solution is at the regional level, and PEDA prioritizes regional projects in that thinking. And this is the big change in terms of strategic frameworks. Second big change is that the priority programs which have been designed within PEDA are embedded theoretically within the context of corridor development. So when we have an optic fiber program from Nigeria to Algeria, close to a gas pipeline and a Trans-Saharan highway, which is almost finalized from Algiers to Lagos, we think in terms of development corridors. And that concept of development corridor is absolutely essential in the implementation of PEDA. Thirdly, the funding of infrastructure in the continent from the 60s to 10 years ago has been essentially based on public funding. 85% of the funding of infrastructure in the continent has been public. With PEDA targeting a gap, which is an important gap, and in order to fund that gap, we absolutely need to open ourselves to the private sector through PPPs. But let us remind us the fact that between 1995 and 2012, domestic resources in the continent were multiplied by 5, from $100-something billion to more than $500 billion today. And this is mainly due to improvements in governance and improvements in the management of public finances. And I like to repeat Christine Lagarde's words, but Africa's public finances today are better managed than Europe's public finances. Fourth point, we see more and more Africa investment funds growing. As a matter of fact, they have been growing 5 times in the last 6 years. And this is due to a sensitivity to the potential of a continent, on the one hand. On the second hand, it is due to a prioritization of projects which didn't exist before. And it was one of the main criticisms to the African side, that we couldn't really prioritize our projects. Now, we have succeeded in prioritizing them on the basis of a large consensus and on the basis of a consensus built on a large consultation process. So today, the 51 priority projects that you have within PEDA are absolutely owned by the national level, the regional level, and the continental level. And 2 words about NEPAD. In framing PEDA, one of the challenges we had was how to structure a sound implementation process. Because as you know, implementation is one of the key weaknesses of the African systems as a whole. So from the start, we embedded in PEDA what we call the institutional architecture for the implementation of PEDA. And that institutional architecture has 2 legs, a decision leg and an implementation leg. And in the decision leg, the African Union and the African Union Commission play a central role. And in the implementation leg, NEPAD, as the development agency of the African Union, is the executing agency of PEDA, which means that our role is to push towards the design of feasibility projects, to push towards mobilization of resources on bankable projects, to monitor and evaluate the implementation of these projects, report to the African Union processes, and in that reporting to the African Union processes, we have designed what we have called VPIC, which is a Virtual Information Center. And VPIC will have mainly three roles: to provide a general information on the projects of PEDA. Secondly, to provide information on the update of the monitoring of these projects, which is extremely important. And then provide a space of interaction with the private sector, because this was also one of the weaknesses that we had. So as the managers of VPIC, we will constitute a critical element in the implementation process of PEDA. And that will allow us to tackle one of the key challenges that we have, which is asymmetry of information. And we are absolutely armed in order to tackle that information gap. Now, what is the future about? We have designed in close cooperation with the African Union Commission and the regional economic communities an infrastructure task team, which I'm leading as the CEO of NEPAD. It is a team working in a full team spirit, which will look at coherence issues among all these levels, continental, regional, and national. And secondly, a team that will look at issues related to capacity building, and essentially capacity building at the level of regional economic communities. And by doing so, we will strengthen and enhance our implementation capacity. Lastly, growth in the continent is not yet synonymous of transformation, as Donald Kaberuka likes to say. We need to be careful and not to be lured by models. You know, we drew a very sound lesson from Tunisia. Tunisia was a country with the highest literacy rate of girls, good ports, good airports, a relatively good agricultural production. And Tunisia failed and imploded. So we don't want to see repeated Tunisias. And this is why when we talk about growth, we make sure that growth is inclusive in order for growth to be sustainable. And the way we think about PEDA's implementation is in that dimension. And we need to make sure that that inclusivity does exist. And lastly, in concluding, in the 51 priority projects that we have in water, ICT, transport, and energy, we make sure that that inclusivity dimension is absolutely present. And it is a wish of the political leadership. It is a motivation of our political leadership. So we need to tackle these issues of implementation, having in mind this concrete dimension. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.